Hello? Is anyone there? Not if you can hear me. Oh, you can't hear me. Damn. That sucks. Well, let me know when you can hear me. Okay? La 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 la. Yeah, if only there was a way you could hear me. Alas, there is not. Well, guess we'll start anyway, don't we? Hi everyone. Hope you're all doing well. If not, hope this scary, scary story will fill you with dread, making your life even miserable. Yes, I have a little friend today, warming himself by the fire, even though he cannot feel it because he's dead. He has no emotions. Trying to get my laptop to work again. What did you do to it? Buddy, what did you do to it? Hello, Midnight. Hello, Homer, with the first as well. Congratulations. You were in here before the stream even started. Nothing. I woke up, turned it on, then I was like, I was about to ask you, have you tried turning it off and then on again? Because if that doesn't work, I don't know what to do. Even though I am in the IT, that's all I can do for you. Well, sucks to be you then, huh? That's what you get for being Danish. So, with our trusty cat staring directly at the camera, without further ado, why don't we get into it, shall we? Let's get some ambience going. Oh, that sounds nice. Or not. It is indeed spooky time. So, as we prepare ourselves to listen to me, why don't I tell you the title of this story? It's called My Father Finally Told Me What Happened Back Then. That was a sudden, abrupt end to that. And here we go. That's a bit loud. That should be fine, right? Not the funeral bells. Yes, the funeral bells. I went to visit my dad not too long ago. We have a good relationship. We just don't talk all that much. His health is starting to decline. He was a little wistful, We're just each having beer, not saying much. When he says he has something he needs to tell me. You're old enough. You may as well know. I didn't know what he was talking about, so I asked him. Remember that time I got home from work, real upset, and I wouldn't tell you what happened? I didn't remember. It wasn't something I would ever forget. He wasn't just upset. He was scared of something. I'd never seen Dad scared in my life until then. He was the kind of guy whose bar fights were of town legends. I always remember he told me never to ask him about it. So I never did. What he told me disturbed me profoundly. I've been bothered by it ever since. I hope writing it out will help me deal. First, a little background. The first incident. When I was really young, like 4 or 5, my dad and I lived in a cheap apartment building on the ground floor. I don't remember much about it. I know I didn't like it there. The kids weren't nice to play with. They would steal my toys. And it was just a grimy area. We were having tough times and it was what he could afford. Probably what I remember most about the place was how I would get woken up from my sleep every once in a while by flashing lights. I don't remember being too worried about it at first. I just assumed there was lots of lighting in that area. I was 5. I didn't know jack about meteorology. One night, my dad had my uncle and his wife over for crab leg dinner. I remember it distinctly because it was the first time I'd ever eaten a crab. While they were talking, I just casually mentioned the lightning last night. Dad said, "There was no lightning last night." I thought he was just clowning around. So I laughed and told him about the flashing lights that woke me up. He and my uncle got serious. That freaked me out, because they were always silly when they got together. They asked me more questions about the lights. Nothing I recall exactly. They decided probably seeing headlights from cars driving by shining on the curtains. I guess I believed them. But after that, I'd always get nervous when the flashing lights would wake me up, because I knew it wasn't lightning anymore. A few times I called for Dad when it happened, but when you get to my room, there's nothing to see. He started telling me it was all in my head. We moved out of that apartment after a year or so, when Dad's handyman business picked up. The flashing stopped when we left, so I came to believe it's a combination of passing cars and my imagination. It wasn't something I ever gave much thought to until recently. Second incident. One time I was helping Dad out on a job. This was a bigger job, kind of rebuilding a whole house. So we had a few other guys working with us. Some of them I knew and some I'd never seen before. I was used to it. It's what he always did on bigger jobs. I was sitting off on my own eating my lunch and listening to my CD Walkman. Guys remember those? Probably not, you're too young to know. Anyway, Dad generally didn't eat lunch. He got too much into work, so he was still busy on site. Suddenly I noticed a guy walking toward me from the general direction of the site. I didn't remember seeing this guy before, but he was making a beeline straight for me. He was an oldish guy. His head was shaved, and he was wearing a Ramones t-shirt. He sat down beside me, way too close, and I didn't say a word. I took my headphones because I didn't want to be rude. I took my headphones off because I didn't want to be rude and said, "Hi." told me my dad was looking for me and I should get heading back as soon as I finish my sandwich. That was the plan anyway, but I said that was fine. To make things less awkward, I said I like the Ramones. He didn't even seem to know who they were. After sitting with me for a few moments longer while I ate my sandwich uncomfortably, he got up and started walking away. I was relieved. I started to put my headphones back on when he suddenly stopped. I don't know why, but it freaked me out. I froze. He turned around and fixed me with the most hateful stare I'd ever seen. I didn't know what it felt like to be hated until then. It was like he wanted me dead. I remember thinking what I should do when he attacks me. But he didn't attack. He just shouted, "Someone's been sleeping in your bed, and I don't like it." He stalked off, leaving me puzzled and terrified. It was probably 85 degrees out, but I was shivering. I put the rest of my sandwich away and went back to work. Hold on, there's a police car outside. And do feel free to chime in and chat if you want. Thoughts, reactions, anything. I like hearing your guys' perspective. Anyway, the rest of my sandwich went away and went back to work. I asked my dad who that guy was a little later. He had no idea who I was talking about. I described the guy. Dad said nobody like that even worked on the site. At the time, I figured it was just some weird drunk. But now it's a whole new meaning. Things that didn't catch before stand out. Like, my sandwich was still in my box when that guy talked to me. How do you know what I brought for lunch? Dad's story. When I was 15, Dad was called out on a job. Some houseway on the other side of the bay. In the town I grew up in, you have two sides. One side of the bay has all the beaches and the mall. The other side has downtown and lots of woods. The old apartment was on the beachy side. The house he called to was a quarter of the way to the next town on the woodsy side. So he shows up in his van with all his tools. The front yard is really overgrown. No vehicle in the driveway except a rustling husk of what used to be a 70s model Chevy. The house is in pretty bad shape. But he went up to the front door. Before he could knock, he saw a note telling him to come right in, and they'd be back soon. He didn't like going into someone's home without them there, because he didn't want to be accused of anything. But he'd driven far, so he went on ahead. He got to work on repairing some of the wood rot around the window frames. He'd be there for nearly an hour when he thought he heard someone. He went to check. There's still no car in the driveway except for his van. "Hello?" he called. He heard what sounded like a door slam. That was not the kind of guy to get nervous. He was a local legend for his bar fights. But he told me he was starting to get creeped out. And that just pissed him off. So he started stomping around the house. He saw the back door was wide open, leading into an overgrown backyard. He wondered if it was just the wind moving the door. He closed it and was going back into work when he decided just to look the place over, just in case. He looks around downstairs. There's nothing much to see. The house is in bad shape, but it's furnished. The place is kept fairly clean and tidy. Electricity still works. Someone's definitely living here, just not able to keep up the place. He's pretty much satisfied his concerns, but he goes upstairs to look around anyway. Upstairs is much of the same as down, clean and tidy, just in need of repairs. Something doesn't feel right about the place to him. Dad's never been much of an intuitive kind of guy, but those must have been some bad vibes. The last room at the end of the upstairs hall is closed. It's the only door that was closed. It's jammed in the window, in the frame somehow, but he gets it open. It's just a bedroom, all painted yellow with yellow furniture. He spots some wood rod around the window frames upstairs too. He was told there would only be 3 windows to do, and this one made 4. But he checks it out. When he does, the sill just lifts right off. There are papers and things stuffed between the walls. He's seen it all. It didn't surprise him. He pulls a paper out because he plans to go ahead and do this window too. Because he's like that. He wouldn't ask for more money. He just wanted the whole job done. When he pulls the paper out, he sees it's mostly photographs. Dad's big on privacy. He just happened to see the photographs, and he knew he was looking at something bad. He started flipping through them. They're all pretty much the same. The back of each picture is dated, but every one of them was a picture of a little boy sleeping. Dad recognized Mia in that ground floor bedroom right away. He remembered my stories of the flashing lights. It hadn't been in my head all along. Someone had been taking pictures of me in my sleep for almost a year. Hey, Careless. Welcome in. He told me there weren't any pictures of other boys either. Whoever took the pictures was only taking pictures of me. He called the police, of course. The listed owner of the house was an elderly couple living in Vancouver. They used to summer in the home, just hadn't gone around to it in years. They didn't even notice they were still paying the electric bill. They had no idea about the pictures or hiring my dad. It was a dead end. I had so many questions after he told me this. For one, why would someone who was so far away from our apartment drive a 30-minute drive at night to take pictures of just me? How'd they even know me? How'd they fixate on one apartment or kid? And why call my dad out to find the stash of pictures after a decade of leaving us alone? Dad actually had an answer for one of those questions. In a way, I find this creepier. Turns out he went to the wrong address. He wrote it down wrong. When police checked his answering machine tape for clues, he was actually called to a much closer home by a completely innocent guy. He stumbled on this house and stash of pictures completely by random misunderstanding. So who left a note on the front door? And that marks the end of chapter 1. What a twist, huh, guys? It's not every day you find your stalker by accident. How you doing, Careless? Thank you for the sub earlier. I want to thank you properly and not through underwater communication. So thank you again. And also for the fucking throne gift. It just got shipped today as I was reading right now. Yeah. Oh, you're doing well. Shall we read part 2? Oh. You didn't have to do that, but thank you. Thank you so much for gifting to Midnight. I need to give back to you someday, buddy. If we ever meet, the first, let's just say 20 beers are on me, buddy. And the dinner. And the hotel room we're going to back afterwards. I mean. Anyway, part 2. I got a lot of really insightful comments and questions from the last post I made. So this is the narrator reading his part 1 responses. You guys saw things from perspective I just didn't think, and it got me thinking there are things I really need to know. So here's an update on what I was able to learn in the last few days. I feel more confused than I did before. Maybe you'll all see more in it than I do. First, I tried talking to my dad, but he wasn't in the best mood. Shut it right down. I pressed him a little on the flashing lights and he told me I should ask my Uncle Matt. So I did. Uncle Matt and my dad get along great. Never seen them fight in my life, but they're very different. Matt's easygoing, jokey. Always has a kind word for everyone. That's why I was shocked when he actually got mad. He told me to never ask him about it again and to leave him alone. That would have been the end right there. But my bi-weekly phone call to my mom was due and I didn't really have anything else to talk to her about. So I told her about what Dad told me, what I remember, what happened with Uncle Matt. What the hell were you thinking? She scolded. Pretty typical of her. She still feels it was his fault. The hush way she said it. The hush way she said it, like someone might overhear, chilled me. I didn't even know what she was talking about. There were some odd things in my family that I kind of knew, but no one really talked about. This is the version of it my mom gave me. What my mom said. My dad and Uncle Matt had a younger sister named Flora. I never knew her as Aunt Flora because she was gone before I was born. When Flora was 8 or 9, weird things started to happen to her. My dad only talked about them when he'd been drinking gin, Mom said. Gin made him rude. She used to hide his gin because it'd freak her out when he talked about these things. Like this one time my dad woke up because he had heard noises in the kitchen. He came out to see what's up. Flora was making peanut butter and sugar sandwich in the middle of the night. He asked her what she was doing because if their mom caught them in the kitchen at that hour, they'd have their butts reddened. That's a weird way to say spank, but okay. Flora told him he had to make a sandwich in a picture for Mr. Godefroy. Mom said Dad would shut her when he said that part of the story. His voice got real low when he'd say the name. So Dad got mad at Flora because he thought she was being dumb or half dreaming. Then she showed him the picture she drew. It was a drawing of a boy sleeping with Matt written above it. My dad, being the oldest child, was very protective of Matt and Flora. He immediately felt something was wrong here. He took the picture and tore it up and told Flora that she had to get back to bed right away. She told him Mr. Godefroy would be mad because she promised him. Dad asked her who this person was and what he looked like because he meant to tell their mom. She says he didn't know what he looked like. But he talked to her from the drain in the bathroom sink. He had told her all sorts of things, and she'd been talking to him every night for a month. At this point, my mom said she didn't want to talk about it anymore. It was giving her the willies. Okay, she didn't even like saying the name. Mom was always kind of superstitious about these things. Like, she would be afraid to say names of certain diseases. She'd never say cancer as if saying it cost it. She said just saying the name Schadenfreude made her feel like she was being watched. But I asked her more questions and she kept going. She said my dad didn't believe Flora. She must have been dreaming or just imagining the whole thing. He took the sandwich and ate it himself, and after sending Flora back to bed. What a bitch. So his mom wouldn't find it. Oh, fair enough. He remembered the sandwich well because peanut butter and sugar was not something they ever made in the household. He had no idea where she'd heard of it. He forgot all about what happened for a few days or weeks. Until one night, he woke up to pee and could hear funny noises as he got near the bathroom. The light wasn't on, but Flora was in there alone. He stopped outside the door to listen. She whispered a whole conversation there. He figured she was half asleep and didn't know what she was doing. He went into the bathroom to get her, then heard himself. There really was a voice coming from the drain. Mom said he would get a distant look when he talked about this and just set the gin down like he couldn't drink anymore. And my dad can always drink more. The voice he heard sounded cold and metallic, probably from coming through the pipes. He figured, but it scared the crap out of him. What it was actually saying was even worse. Mom said he tried to imitate the metallic voice, saying, "Come outside, Flora. Come on outside. No one has to sleep out here." Flora whispered into the sink that she couldn't because her brother might catch her, and the strange voice told her he never should have eaten my sandwich. Oh, I'm so sorry for bonking you guys. Hearing it made my dad's hair stand on end. My mom said it's the most scared he'd ever been. Not one to freeze. My dad pulled Flora out of the bathroom and slammed the door. He warned her never to talk to Mr. Schadenfreude again because he was bad. He ended up telling his mom, and they found where some of the pipes had been messed with under the house. They also found some drawings of my dad and Uncle Matt sleeping. They were all burned right away, and his mom forbade them to talk about it. They didn't handle the scandal like that too well at the time. But my dad saw some of the drawings before they were burned, and they weren't drawn by Flora. I had never heard anything about any of this before. Dad and Uncle Matt always never talked about Flora. Anyway, and when they did, it was always cryptic. I didn't know what this had to do with me, but my hand was shaking holding the phone. I thought she was done, but she said that this was just the beginning. My mom usually gets tired after talking about it for 10 minutes or so. I was surprised. Maybe she needed to get this out of her system. Let me just get some tea real quick. She said that after that, Flora used to complain about flashing lights in her bedroom. Everyone just figured she was seeing the lights from the lighthouse because it was still active back then. She complained about it for nearly 2 years, saying she had trouble sleeping. Her mom got sick of it and put thicker curtains in her bedroom. She kept complaining. They ended up getting her a sleeping mask. Problem solved. Not long after this, Matt and Flora went to the friend's house to hang out because he had a record player and his parents would get him any record he wanted. They'd all just listen to music together. She left to go home before Dad and Matt did, but she never made it home. They never found her body. In theory, she could still be alive, but nobody really believes that. Mom thinks Dad and Uncle Matt always felt like person responsible for it, because if they just left with her, she might still be alive. Mom figures that's why the flashing lights thing upset Dad and Uncle Matt so much. And I guess I was opening old wounds by asking about it. At the same time, I find it really spooky that the same thing would happen to both me and Flora, and upsetting that it wasn't taken more seriously when it happened to me. I also felt really bad about hurting Uncle Matt. I visited him in the next days to apologize. I told him my mom explained everything, and I really had no idea. He wasn't mad anymore. Actually, he apologized to me too, because he said I deserved to know what Uncle Matt said. He said there's a little bit more to it than what my mom described. A week before she disappeared, Flora had started complaining about the flashing lights again. They figured either she was forgetting to put on her mask, or it had been in her head this whole time. Then, a day or two before she disappeared, he couldn't remember. She woke up, and the mask was gone. She couldn't find it anywhere. They figured she just didn't want to wear it anymore. But now he wasn't so sure. Another weird thing, around the same time, was they found footprints in the snow outside the house. It had snowed almost 3 feet overnight. These footprints led out of the woods behind the house and went straight to Flora's window. The thing Uncle Matt said creeped him out the most was that the footprints at the window didn't face into the window. They faced back toward the woods, where there was nothing but trees. For the footprints to not have been covered by snow, someone would have to walk to Flora's bedroom window sometime after midnight and stood there staring into the woods in a blizzard. Strangely, he said, they never really worried about it much. Everyone knew everyone there. It just stands out in hindsight. The day she disappeared, they got a call from Timmy Jean, the boy with the records, telling them he just got a new one. Uncle Matt said Timmy was an only child. Yeah, fuck only child. Am I right? Wah wah. Am one myself. Anyway, he thought the records were how Timmy's parents got him off their hands and made him some friends. So, he was never really excited when he got records to share. This day he sounded flat, emotionless. Matt had to ask if he was even speaking to Timmy, and the whole time, Uncle Matt felt like someone was listening in. He could hear a sound in the background that wasn't quite breathing. It was like someone saying, "Yeah," really softly. around this time, where Dad and Uncle Matt grew up, the phone lines were all what they call party lines. Each home's phone would have a different ring so they knew who should call, but anyone could answer or listen in on anyone else's phone call, so having someone else on the line was not unheard of, just impolite. They went to Timmy's, but when they arrived, Timmy said he didn't call them, and he didn't even have a new album. Uncle Matt and Dad decided to hang out with Timmy and listen to some old albums anyway. But Flora was really disappointed and wanted to go home, so she left alone. You remember thinking it was too bad she left because they found her sleep mask in Timmy's room. That was the last time they ever saw her, Uncle Matt said. He was trying hard not to tear up. He said he remembered it like it was yesterday. Her little brown shoes, bows in her hair, and he said the oversized Ramones t-shirt they'd found during the trip to the city. It was her favorite band. I felt an awful pit in my stomach when he said that. I don't think I'd ever mentioned the detail about the Ramones t-shirt before. But that Uncle Matt would pull my leg on something like this, I guess it could have been a coincidence. A lot of people like the Ramones, but I never felt so unsettled in my life. I told him about the guy in the Ramones t-shirt. He told me to just drop it, because it was a long time ago. That was all he said. There's a lot of what Uncle Matt said that I find strange. Like how unconcerned he seemed that Timmy had made the phone call, or the sleep mask. I'm visiting my dad for Thanksgiving tomorrow. I'm going to bring the 2 bottles of De Cooper gin. Have a happy Thanksgiving. I'll let you know if I find out anything more. So that's the end of part 2. Slowly, things are unraveling. Hope you guys are enjoying it so far. Yeah. I hope my little cat here isn't peering into your soul and the darkness inside of it, commanding it to come out and do evil deeds. See? Red. The color of niceness, right? Definitely not blood. We still have 5 more parts. This is the 7th part story. So buckle up, buckaroos. We're in it for the long haul. Part 3. Again, starting off with recapping from the last post. I just want to thank everyone again for your interest in my personal journey and for sharing your views. I might have walked away from it by now if it weren't for your support, because the more I learn, the less I seem to understand. But I did learn more from my dad over Thanksgiving. I had to mull it over for a few days. Now that I have, I feel comfortable sharing it. When I first unloaded the bottles of gin, Dad looked at me like I was setting a trap. In a way, I guess I was. I wonder if he knew what I was up to. I know at least he hadn't talked to Mom. They still hate each other. But Dad's a man's man and doesn't turn down a drink. I kept waiting for the opportunity to start asking questions, but it never felt right. Turns out I didn't have to. Dad asked me if Uncle Matt talked. I told him he had, but that there was a lot of things that didn't make sense to me. Get used to it, he answered. I kept waiting for the opportunity. Wait, no. I was starting to get upset with all the secrecy. We'd always been a family of straight talkers. And that's how we thought of ourselves. I didn't see why this was suddenly changing. So I asked him why he wasn't more alarmed by the flashing lights in my room when the same thing was happening to his little sister. And why he didn't immediately think I was in danger when he found those pictures of me. Why didn't he do anything? He told me he did more than I'll ever know. That was that I was typical of my video gaming generation, and to go ahead and have another drink. 'Cause it's Thanksgiving. I did. But I wasn't feeling very thankful. He told me he did more than I'll ever know. Wait, no, fuck. I'm losing my track here. Sorry about that. After sitting in silence for a while, which is pretty typical for us actually, he said, "Never liked that little rat." I just waited for him to elaborate. Dad talks at his own pace. "Timmy Jean, he said. I hadn't expected him to say anything about Timmy. He was about as peripheral to what happened as I could imagine. But Dad had a whole lot more to say about him. Dad said Timmy wasn't really a bad kid. He was just strange and pale and weak. Most other kids didn't like him. His parents didn't even seem to like him. Even the kids who did like him didn't really like him. The general opinion was that Timmy's parents were always gone, though it was hard to tell whether they were home or not. They kept to themselves. Rumors went around that they were brother and sister. One thing that was certain was that they'd inherited money. Unlike everyone else, they didn't keep any livestock. They just bought everything from the general store for Timmy and disappeared. Dad said today it'll be called neglect, but people watched out for each other back then. One thing that always struck Dad as peculiar was how, when they wanted Timmy to do something other than listen to records, like go play kick the can, he'd say he was going to ask his parents. None of them had seen or heard his parents in the house, so they were surprised. But Timmy would go into his room, or into one of the rooms, close the door behind him, and they'd hear him talk to someone in there. He'd come out and tell them he had to stay put. This happened a few times, he said. Not that they invited Timmy Jean out all that much. Another thing he didn't like talk about Timmy was about he'd go to... Let's try that one again. Another thing he didn't like about Timmy was he'd just do strange things. Sometimes he seemed pretty normal. Then he'd change just like that. This one time they were listening to some new records he had. He turned it off and told them he had learned a new song and dance. Dad wasn't interested, thinking it would be childish, but Flora and Matt wanted to see. Timmy started walking backwards in a circle. Good on the second, careless. In a circle, shaking like he was freezing. Thank you for the hydration too. Like he was shaking and making shrieking sounds. It was annoying the hell out of Dad, as he told Timmy to cut it out. But Timmy kept doing it. Dad had never seen Timmy show any emotion or other than excitement over his records. And he was doing this dance. He looked downright hateful. Flora started crying, and Matt looked pretty scared too. Dad never had patience for stupidity. He grabbed Timmy by the shoulders, and he said he remembered how Timmy felt. His skin was cold and jelly-like. He could feel his small shoulder bones like they weren't covered at all. He shook Timmy until he stopped and was back to normal. Timmy started playing the record again like nothing had happened. Dad said they left because Flora was too upset. It was after that, Dad said, that he went to get Timmy for something. He couldn't remember what, and Timmy wasn't home. That wasn't weird in itself, but Dad went inside to look for him just in case. He couldn't find him, so he'd just ask if Timmy's parents, where Timmy was gone. He opened the door to the room Timmy always went into. The room was kept really dark. They could never see anything when Timmy slept in. Now he knew why. It wasn't a bedroom at all. It was just a closet. There was a cushion thrown on the floor, some bread crusts, and a piece of paper. Dad said he'd seen enough. He closed the door and got out, never went back to Timmy's again. Because when Timmy would go in that room, they wouldn't just hear Timmy's talking. They'd hear someone talking back to him. I'd already drank more gin than I should have, but that still sent shivers through me. But I thought of something. I asked my dad if this ever happened after Flora disappeared. He said no. So I said, how was it he was at Timmy's at the day Flora disappeared? Your Uncle Matt doesn't always remember things right, he said. He gave me a stern stare when he said this, like it was something I should keep in mind to the end of my days. I know Dad's look very well. About Uncle Matt. He said Matt came up to him that day and said he got a call from Timmy to come over and listen to a new record. He heard the call come in, and that wasn't strange. But he never went with him to Timmy's. He went to the general store to pick up a present for Befty Coffin, a girl he fancied, and Matt and Flora went to Timmy's by themselves. When he was at the general store, he remembered being surprised to see Timmy there, just picking up some food with big wad of bills. He'd never seen that much money in one place in his whole life, so he wasn't likely to forget it. He told Timmy hello, but Timmy just paid for his food and walked out with his food and bills, and Flora never came home from Timmy's that day. And that's all I know about you, Zed. I told him Uncle Matt said he was listening to music with him and Timmy when Flora left on her own. Who was he listening to music with then? Wasn't Timmy, was all Dad said. It was so eerily matter of fact. I took another shot of gin right there. I hoped it'd stop me from shaking. When I looked at Dad, he was staring down with a sad resignation I'd never seen on him before. My dad drank me under the table 10 times over. So after that last shot, he put me to bed on his couch. That was the end of our talk. Lying there on the couch, I suddenly remembered something from way back. My family would go down to the beach. We'd all sit around the fire. The adults would drink and tell stories about growing up in that hamlet, and the kids would roast marshmallows and shiver listening to these stories. There were true stories and ghost stories all mixed together. These were the only occasions where I'd never ever heard him talk about Florida before. After what my dad said, I remember a story Uncle Matt told me. He said he and Flora would go for these long walks in the woods together. My dad used to go with them. since he was expecting to watch them. But once he hit his teenage years, he got more interested in girls and babysitting. They decided to go back into the woods behind Hyman's general store. There are no trails or anything. Just picked a spot and went into the woods. You can go back for miles and miles into just pure wood. It's all national parkland today. Normally they'd walk about 30 minutes or an hour. Dad would have them walk parallel to the edge of the woods. Without Dad, they'd just keep going deeper. They'd been walking into the woods for well over an hour, or at least he thinks it was. Flora wanted to turn back by this time, but Matt wanted to keep going deeper. She followed him because she was scared to go off alone, but she got upset and said she was going back on her own. He told her that's fine and get lost. Uncle Matt said she wasn't gone 30 seconds when he felt her tugging at his arm. He got mad because he thought she was bucking him to go with her. But when he looked, she was pointing at something behind him. He said really seriously that he'd never forget how wide and scared her eyes were. He turned and saw a man standing out in the woods. It scared him too. The man didn't look scary. He was just a man. There's no reason for anyone to be so far out in the woods. They shouldn't even be there. The man had his back to them, looking deeper into the woods. He wasn't moving at all. They crouched down as quietly as they could to watch him. But he didn't do anything but stand there. He kept glancing behind his shoulder as they walked. Wait, hold on. Matt said he didn't like it one bit. He felt there was something really wrong about what was going on. He took Flora by the hand, something he never did, and they walked away, making as little sound as possible. He kept glancing behind his shoulder as they walked. After a few minutes, he was satisfied. They were all away from that man. He was long out of sight and probably hearing range too. After a few minutes of walking, Matt heard a thudding sound. Flora squeezed his hand tighter, so he knew she heard it too. But they didn't say anything to each other. They were too scared. The thudding kept getting louder. Then he heard this scream at the top of someone's lungs, like he'd been hurt. Matt looked back and saw the man they'd seen earlier running right at them full speed through the woods, screaming the whole time. No words. Matt, Sati, and Flora were so scared they couldn't even run. They backed up against a tree and crouched down. Matt thought the man was going to kill them or hurt them, and he didn't know what to do. The man caught up to him. He stopped short, only a few feet away. He took in a deep breath and shouted in their faces, "Get out!" They were too scared to move, so the man kept shouting at them, "Get out! Get out!" Finally, Matt talked to Flora, and they ran and ran and ran back the way they came. They were almost out. They heard Dad calling for them. Somewhere back in the woods. They were about to go running back to Dad, so he'd protect them. But then they saw him in the tree line and ran into him. He took them home, and that was that. He never said it, never told their mother, because they figured they would be trespassing. They were just trespassing. After Uncle Matt finished his story, everyone was quiet for a good long time. The story seemed to bother Dad more than anyone else. I remember being especially upset by it. just because it bothered Dad. Then Dad said he remembered that when he first came to get them, he couldn't find them. He figured they'd just gone home. But he couldn't find them at home either. He looked in the general store and down by the fishing wharf, but they weren't there either. So he went back to the woods. Just as he got there, he saw them come running out of the woods, screaming and crying. He asked them what was going on, thinking they'd just seen a bear or something, and they just kept bawling. So he brought them home and questioned them to get the whole story. He said he never told Uncle Matt at the time, but he saw them coming out of the woods as soon as he got there. He never did call out to him. I don't know why I suddenly remembered that story. It's just another weird thing that happened to my family. Just an hour away from where my dad grew up, in the nearest bigger town, there's a huge sanatorium up on a hill. Looks like a whole town. The guy in the woods could just been some guy who got out of there. They had the misfortune of startling him. Could be completely unrelated to everything else. So that gave me a lot to think about. I don't feel any more secure or confident in what Dad told me. If anything, I'm more confused and unsettled than ever. The last several days have been a strange ride, but I know there's no way I can let that go now. I'll try to find out more. I'll continue sharing what I can. Thank you so much for the follow, the Ave. How are you doing tonight? Are you here for the spooky times? We just finished part 3 of 7 in a story. Which one? This one? Or this one? Kato. Yes, it appearing into your soul. And it wants a I don't even know what it wants. What do you want, buddy? What's that? Ah, I see. Big titty goth girls. I know, right? But yeah, what brings you in tonight? You getting cozy and getting scared. Hope not too scared. We still have 4 more parts to read. Me personally, I'm really liking this story. A lot of mystery, a lot of world building, lots of mystery. Yeah, again, I just said that. But like, who is all these people? Why do people sound like other people? Are there skinwalkers among us? Among us? Sus? But yeah, like, I'm really liking this story. This is not the first time I read it. So I am trying to be well versed in it. But yeah, we'll be continuing with part 4 in just a second. Yes, very sus. Here's a hydration check for every one of you guys. Remember to drink lots of liquids. I myself have drunk all my tea, but I do have water. I can also say that this light here is also heating up water, which is containing rosewood oil, making this entire room smell absolutely lovely. I wish you guys could smell it with me. That sounds a bit weird, but yeah. And congratulations on being the 450th follower. You get nothing, but you get to say that you are my 450th follower. So congratulations. On with the story, shall we? Wow. I managed to find out more about Timmy. I had to hit up with people. I had to hit up people I haven't spoken to in a long time and barely know at all. But eventually, I had a few relatives who were more than I ever expected to find. Oh my, Cassie, I'm sorry. Before I share what I learned about Timmy, though, I've asked in the comments how I can keep such a level head while I keep uncovering these weird incidents. I guess because it's distant, I shake and shiver and feel dread when I hear about or remember these events. But it's still way back there. Even my dad finding the pictures in that house happened years ago. That's been changing lately. Little things have been happening that have been making me uneasy. For one, my mom has called me twice since Thanksgiving. I know, it's not overtly creepy, but we normally only talk once every 2 weeks. On top of that, she hasn't been herself. She's been trailing off, going silent for long periods, and sometimes like there's an echo when she speaks. Or started wondering if someone was tapping into our conversations, like a baby monitor or something. And she's been saying strange things. For instance, after being quiet for a while, she said, "It's lonely down here." I asked her what she meant by down here, since she didn't live any farther south than me. She just said in a tone so flat that I swear she could have been reading it. "You should come. It's wonderful down below." She changed the subject right after and seemed normal after that. My first instinct was to worry that she was depressed or something, but I don't know. The last thing she said was if I hear anything strange about her, to not believe it. I've also been receiving other phone calls. They started a little before Thanksgiving. First call was an instant hang up. The next time, just silence. Each time after that, I'd hear sounds, cars going by, walking, the wind blowing. The kind of sounds you'd hear from a butt call, but they were distorted. Also like someone was imitating the sounds with their mouths. Last night it changed. There was a voice. The voice had a tinny, metallic tone, and that same echo as when Mom called. The combination made the voice sound inhuman and evil. The words were not sinister at all, but the way they were said made me feel like I was in danger for the first time since I started this investigation. The first time, all he said was, "I'm on the way." I tried to say, "Wrong number," but whoever it was already had hung up. I got a call a little later, and the same voice said, "I'll be there soon." This time he didn't hang up right away, so I said he had the wrong number. A moment after I said it, he hung up. On the third call, he said, "I can see your house," and again hung up immediately. I kept waiting for another call any minute, but after a few hours, I really relaxed. I figured it really was the wrong number, and they figured it out. I mean, given the last 2 weeks, I have every reason to be a little jumpy. get about halfway through an episode of Gotham on the DVR before the phone rang again. I don't say anything immediately. Neither does he. After a minute or so, he says, "I'm right outside." As soon as he said that, I heard a noise from at the front door, and I don't know if I've ever been so scared before. I don't have any firearms, but I do have a machete. So I grabbed it and went to the front door, opened it ready for that hateful face from the building site or worse. But my dad was there actually. He asked me what the machete was for. And I asked him what brought him out to my house so late. It's a long enough drive, and my dad rarely visits anyway. He got pretty irritated by that. He opened his flip phone. Yep, back then. And showed me text apparently from me. In the text, I asked him to come and meet out immediately. It's an emergency. I told my dad I didn't send him that text. I didn't send him any text. I never lied to dad before. And that carries weight. He believed me. To be honest though, I was glad he was there at that just moment. We had a drink together and then said he was going back home. I asked him a few more questions about Timmy before he left. He didn't much want to talk about it, but I add what he told me into the account of what I learned. After Flora disappeared, Dad and Matt were expressly forbidden to have anything to do with Timmy. For Dad, that suited him just fine. Dad nevertheless told Mom that Timmy couldn't have been responsible, since he'd just seen him at Hyman General Store. His mom said there had always been something wrong with that boy, and felt if Flora hadn't gone to his home that day, she'd still be alive. While Dad and Matt hoped she was still alive, their mom never really believed she was. She said she said she saw a dove fly into the house the day after Flora disappeared, but when she chased after it, she couldn't find it anywhere. Dad said it was just grief, and these kinds of supernatural beliefs were common then. I tend to agree. Timmy made no efforts to reach out to Dad or Matt either. He started keeping to himself after Flora disappeared. They'd sometimes see him by himself at Hyman's, buying lots of food. Way more than one boy could require. They never talked. Suspicions about Timmy and concerns about his missing parents grew. The police had looked around Timmy's house a little since it's where Flora was last seen and found nothing. But now they asked to search the house. They wouldn't want to say what was wrong or what they found in the house. The rumor was that Timmy's parents hadn't been there in a long time, and the police had come out of the house pale and upset. Small towns always have rumors. Hard to say if they were true or false. Timmy was placed with some distant relatives in a larger town an hour away. They said he was strange and they didn't like him. He was always up and walking around at night. Sometimes he'd stop over the vents in the floor and just stare into them. After he'd been there for a bit, they started to hear him talking to himself in the middle of the night. They'd just come up to him to see what he was doing, and there was no one else around. They just started watching. They noticed he only did this when he was standing over the air vents. They found him crouching down over one once. This girl, a third cousin of his, said it still creeped her out because she knows she heard someone answering him on one time. Those vents couldn't have been more than 1.5 feet wide, she said, but she heard a man's voice coming up with the air. She couldn't make out what was being said, but she heard laughter that made her run and hide under her covers. She said she thinks this part may have been a dream, but she always swore she saw a finger poking up from the vent too. She told her parents, but they said to stop making up stories, and he'd been through a lot. Her sister said sometimes Timmy would walk out in the woods and just stand there, staring into him. They asked him why he did that. He said he was just waiting to be taken. He went farther into the woods when she tried to talk to him more. On one time, the same girl said, she heard him talking to the air vents like usual. She was tired, and it was upsetting her. So she went to get her parents and have him sent off to bed. On her way, she noticed Timmy was still sound asleep in his room. The talking had to be coming up from the vents all on its own. They said Timmy would sometimes steal food from the house and take it out into the woods. When he was caught, he said he had a treehouse, but they never saw if it existed. They sometimes wake up and find him staring at them in the middle of the night, so they had to start locking their doors. What a fucking freak. They would whine to their parents and send him away all the time, but they were careful not to do it when Timmy was around, because, despite everything, they didn't want to be mean. One time, he asked them why they wanted him sent away. They couldn't figure out how he'd heard. He was living with them for nearly 6 months when something happened that changed him. They didn't know what it was, but he stopped all the weird behavior all at once. He wouldn't talk to anyone. He hardly ate. Then one day, he ran away. He'd been a missing person ever since. His parents never turned up to look for him. There was no evidence either way, so case went nowhere. They also said years later, when his house burned down, pictures of the fire appeared in the local newspaper. People talked about it for weeks because of the picture. The smoke looked just like the devil, horns and everything. They tried to find the newspaper in their closets, but neither of them could find it. I include that part not because I believe in horned devils that manifest himself in smoke patterns. I think it's interesting that his cousins thought he was so creepy, the devil would be in the smoke particles coming off of his burning house. That's what I know about Timmy. He hasn't been seen or heard from since. From all I can find out, same for his parents. Where his home was is just a lush field of rhododendrons. One last thing. After Dad left last night, I noticed my mailbox lid was up. I knew I'd closed it earlier when I checked the mail. So I looked inside, and I found an envelope with a pair of Polaroid photo inside. An old one too. It was of me, Mom, and Dad, all together at the park. This park is actually the same place where Dad grew up. The houses are mostly gone. Hyman's General Store is still there as a museum. I had to be only 4 or 5 in the picture. I don't even remember Mom going to the park with us. I wonder if Dad found it and stuck it in my mailbox. But Dad wouldn't bother to bring it to me even if he found it. He wouldn't see value in it. I kept looking at it, wondering what it was doing here. It took me a surprisingly long time to see it. In the background, in the thick Johnson grass, there was a man crouched down watching us. He was barely visible. I couldn't discern his face, or any expressions in his eyes. Just had a vague but real feeling he meant to do us harm. I don't want to be an alarmist. The strange things happening to me all have incident. Oh, wait, what? I don't want to be too alarmist. The strange things happening to me may all be innocent explanation and I'm just being jumpy. I still want to get to the bottom of things. My investigations hit a dead end, but I'll keep you all posted. And that's the end of part 4 of 7. And now I do really need to get a drink or some more. My throat is starting to. And we also need to top off our basin here. I'm so sorry about that. Posture check. Thank you very much. Just give me a second here. Thank you very much, Careless. So, any theories? Does Timmy have anything to do with the current events that are happening to our main protagonist called, I don't know. Does the dad know more than he's letting on? Is there a family secret, maybe? Is that why everyone's getting so upset that things are happening again? And if Timmy was at the grocery store, who was the kid who was last seen with Flora? Are there any connections at all? They have to know to get mad about it, right? Yeah. So I don't actually remember the ending of this story. But who knows? Maybe there's no correlation at all. I guess we'll just have to find out, why don't we? Okay, stretch. Okay, part 5. Confessions. Again, I have to thank you all for your input. I realize I've been stupid and glib. I've always been passive and I don't like getting too excited about things. Thinking about it, maybe it all goes back to when I'd freak out over those flashing lights. My dad would tell me it was in my head. He downplayed everything. So now I just kind of do the same. But still, it's my character flaw, not his. I have to take responsibility. So I went ahead and called in a wellness check on my mom. And I went ahead and called the police about the photograph and strange text. I called Dad over since I knew they'd all want to see his phone. This is where things started to get perplexing. The police officer who responded seemed to know my dad pretty well. He was an older man, about Dad's age, maybe a little older. I never met him before. Dad introduced me as Kirby and said they used to live a few houses away from each other, back where they grew up. Kirby did most of what I expected from the police. Introduced him as Kirby, not me, lala. Kirby did most of what was expected from the police. He looked at the photograph. He checked out the text. He took my statement. He decided to hold on to the photograph just in case. But he said it wasn't likely there was anything for the police that they could do. Once he was done with me, he gestured for my dad to come outside with him for a talk. I didn't think he realized I saw. Dad told me to wait inside, and he'd be back in a moment. There was just so many secrets lately, so I listened at the door. I'll try and do a voice here. Does he know anything about it? Kirby asked. If Dad answered, I couldn't hear it. That's what this is, isn't it? Sure looks like it. Again, no audible answer. What did we do back then? Also, this guy's Elvis. He was saying, but Dad interrupted him to say, it was a long time ago. This here's just a dumb prank. Quit being stubborn and stupid, Francis, he said. Nobody ever called Dad by Francis. It was Frank or Frankie. Calling him Francis was a good way to break your jaw, so was calling him stupid. But Dad didn't say anything back. What the hell else could this mean? Smarten up, Dad said. We did the right thing. Anyhow, you know it. Says me too. Someone might not agree. Watch yourself, Francis. Kirby got in his car and left right after that. Assuming he, as the first question, was me, I can say I didn't know anything about what they were saying. Oh yeah, so I asked Dad when he came back in, he didn't get mad. He said it was just something that happened a long time ago, and to mind my own business. I told him this had become my business. I reminded him that he told me about the pictures he found in that old house because I thought I was old enough to hear it now. He said, guess I was wrong. That was that. I tried calling Mom to see if they had any insight, but there was no answer. Not unusual, though I'm still glad I called to check on her. I called Uncle Matt next. To my surprise, he said he had something he wanted to show me, and he'd be over later. When he did come, what he showed me really shook me up. And it made things a little bit more it made things make a little more sense. Maybe that's why it shook me. Uncle Matt told me a lot more things that happened when they were children than I'd ever hear about. Not that he wouldn't talk about them, but he didn't think he even could. Some of those things stuck with him, he said, and they'd bother him all the time. When he used to have fun doing what he used to have fun doing started to make him feel sick. He thought about killing himself a few times. He even took himself to the sanatorium for a day. I had no idea any of this happened. Neither did Dad, he said. He didn't want anyone to know. He started seeing a therapist after this. Something Dad would have made fun of. I don't know if that's true, but that's what Uncle Matt thought. The therapist insisted he'd try a hypnosis session because he was holding back too much. He agreed. What he brought with him was an old cassette tape the therapist let him keep of one of his sessions. We put him in my CD cassette recorder, CD player, and listened. On the recording, Uncle Matt was talking about the day Flora disappeared. He said he remembered getting a call from someone asking to come to Timmy's. He knew the person talking to himself wasn't Timmy. The person sounded weird and frantic. He tried to tell the person no, but the man kept saying he really was Timmy and he really was lonely down here, and he needed them to come listen to the music records with him. I sadly cannot refund you that. I turned off pretty much every sound alert, but you got a bit of it. I can play it again if you want. I need to like disable it once I do these kind of streams. The person sounded weird and frantic. He tried to tell the person, no, especially the new one. Okay. I'll reimburse you somehow. Don't worry. You can just tell me what you want, and I'll just do it. On the recording, Uncle Matt said he figured Timmy had to be there at least, and he wanted to hear the new record, so he got Flora and Dad. He didn't bother giving them many details about the phone call. On the way there, Dad left to go meet a girlfriend or something, so he and Flora went alone. When they got to the house, the front door was left open, and they could hear the song Love Hurts playing upstairs. They heard the song before, so they knew it wasn't the new album. That was good, because they wanted to listen to it for the first time all together. When they got upstairs, Timmy wasn't there. He remembered the room smelled like burning tires. It never smelled like that before. Uncle Matt took the needle off the record. Then he noticed Flora backed into the corner and whimpering. Uncle Matt looked where she was looking, because she was looking right at something he hadn't seen at all. But there was a man laying under the bed. His face poked out of the dark just enough for them to see his blank stare and huge smile. His smile just didn't look right. There was no happiness in it at all. He started coming out from under the bed. The man was looking straight at Flora and shouted, "I don't want to see you in the dark anymore." Uncle Matt stood between Flora and the man because he was scared for Flora. The burning smell was stronger than the closer the man got. He thought he'd seen the man before, a few years ago. The man put Love Hurts back on and laughed. The laugh sounded fake, like an animal imitating a human. Hi, Ellie. He danced around, laughing sometimes, and then screaming like he was in pain. He kept putting the needle to the beginning of the track and dancing. One time, when the man went to move the needle back to the beginning of Love Hurts, Uncle Matt told Flora to get out. She ran, but the man put his hands on Matt's shoulder. "I like you when you sleep," he said. He held Matt around the neck, and they danced backwards around the room, over and over. Sometimes he made sounds like a wounded creature. After a while, he let go and crawled back under the bed. He was lying on his back, looking up at the mattress. Uncle Matt figured he could leave. He was scared to try, but he thought the man might stop him. But he started out the room to the stairs anyway. He looked back, just in case. The man wasn't under the bed anymore. He'd already gotten up and was just a few feet behind Uncle Matt. He froze when Uncle Matt looked at him and didn't move a muscle. Uncle Matt backed the rest of the way, down the stairs and out of the house. The man never moved. If I just listened to my gut, we'd never gone there. If I kept Flora with me, she might have been okay. If I'd been smarter and gone with her right away, she'd be okay. All the time, I know it's my fault she's gone and she ain't coming back. That's where the tape ended. Uncle Matt listened to the whole tape with me, with his head down. He told me he really doesn't remember it happening that way at all. He said he was sure he told me the truth, but he wanted me to hear this. I think Uncle Matt was so traumatized by what happened, he isn't able to remember it. I don't blame him. What's on the tape matches up with the story my dad told me. So it's probably right. Uncle Matt didn't know what the guy was, or what had happened to him. But if he was with Matt and Timmy was with Dad, that guy couldn't have been involved in what happened to Flora any more than Timmy was. Or at least, it's not very probable. Another bit of information just fell into my lap. It's funny the way things all happen at once. Like you've never have heard an old song, and then suddenly you're here 3 times in one day. Mom called later that night. She wanted to know why I called it for. I told her about what I heard Dad and Kirby saying. She said she never wanted to believe it, but it must be true. I told her she had to tell me, and she agreed. What she told me isn't what I'd expected at all. She said a long time ago, a sad, lonely man was placed in the sanatorium when they found him living in the walls of the hospital. He had no family and no friends, and they determined he was harmless. They released him. He wandered through the woods for days. He wandered so far back, he got lost and was thirsty and hungry. Then he found a house. He thought it was strange for a house to be in the middle of the woods, but he needed food and water. An old man came to the door and let him in. He had no idea how long he was in there. Something bad happened in that house, so he ran away from the house as fast as he could. He ran until he came to He ran until he came to the little one-store town, Dad's hometown. Some of the children in the town would talk to him and bring him sandwiches because he made them think that he was a good ghost. One lonely boy in particular gave him a place to stay. Timmy showed him music and got him all the food he wanted. He taught Timmy all the tricks he'd learned in his life, hiding and listening and crawling, and the things he learned from the house in the woods. He got so used to the boy, he would get mad if Timmy left the home or did anything but spend time with him. He tried to hide himself as much as possible, but when Flora disappeared, people noticed him. They figured out he'd been staying with Timmy, and they figured he did something to Flora. My dad remembered what Flora had said about seeing a man in the woods, and he remembered the voice in the bathroom sink. He riled up everyone against the man, so he hit even more. He hit well enough, everyone thought he was gone. When he thought they'd forgotten about it, he figured he could go back to being normal, but they hadn't forgot him. Dad saw him. He got some people in town together. They chased him all the way to Dad's house. Dad followed him under the house. When he thought he cornered him, he followed him up through a hole in the floor. It took him right under Dad's bed. Dad saw there were trinkets and bedding under there, like the man had been sleeping right under him all along. Dad was so mad he dragged the man out. They beat him, and when they done beating him, they burned him up. And when they just done burning him up, they buried him. They never talk about it since. They agreed that just they agreed they just did what they had to do. But what they did was murder. That's how Mom told it. It was such a weird story. It wasn't like her to talk like that at all. I asked her where she'd even heard the story. She said it was just another one of those things Dad would say when he's been in the gin. She said that one took a lot of gin. It bothered him more than anything else. I didn't know whether to believe it or not. I changed subject. I told her how I called a wellness check on her because I was worried. She told me I shouldn't have done that. Why? She said, as I was wasting police time. She wasn't even at her home. She was on a business trip. I guess the whole thing made me bolder. The next day I confronted Dad about what Mom told me and asked him if it was true. He just asked, "Where did you hear that?" I told him Mom said, "I'll never forget this for the rest of my life." He placed his hand on my shoulders like he's only done once before when he gave me the life advice I'd be needing after graduating high school. And he said, "Son, I never told your mother that, and she's not from our town." The way he said it, like he knew something was horribly wrong, scared the life out of me. This mystery is upsetting my life and my family in the worst way, because it's in my ideas. He brushed it off as Mom being a major B. I'm guessing bitch. I think there was something more. I still don't know if this story was true or false. He won't give me a straight answer. He won't deny it either. Lastly, I did get a response on the wellness check. They were let into Mom's home by a house sitter. The sitter said she'd been in her home for a week, and there was nothing to worry about. The officer called Mom and she backed up everything the sitter said. Looks like Mom's story checks out. The officer who called me said he was running a trace on her call on her cell phone anyway, because something wasn't sitting right. I'm not sure where to go with this investigation next. I'm a little too scared to keep going, to be honest. Even if I knew what to do next, I have to find out anything more as soon as always. Wait, what? If I found out anything more, as always, I'll share. So that was part 5 of 6 of 5 of 7. So yeah, welcome in, Foxy. How are you doing tonight? First time to my stream. How are you liking the story so far? And what about you, Careless? Any ideas coming to life? Is Timmy the protege of this burnt man? Is there anything supernatural going on? Is this all just a huge misunderstanding? Like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take pictures of you when you were a child. Is that where we are? I don't think so. You want it to be supernatural? I can see it. Like that guy underneath the bed definitely reeks of, I want to say, black magic. If he smells burnt. Maybe he survived being burnt and buried and beaten. Maybe his spirit lives on. Well, why don't we find out as we continue with part 6 of my dad finally told me what happened back then. It's been a rough week. I haven't been able to reply to comments. You'll understand why after reading. So, for those who are new in chat, the start of every part is always like, these are supposed to be like posts to a website. So he's recapping and also responding to people in chat, more or less. Also, let's get some more rosewood oil into my water to make it even more amazing smelling in here. Can highly recommend getting rosewood. It smells amazing. You'll understand why after reading. I still need to write this. Get it out. I don't think you know what a support you all have been. After my last update, I did something I haven't done since Mom left. I broke down. I called Mom up and told her everything that's been going on and how it's been affecting me. I told her I couldn't take it anymore. I have a regular life I should be leading. I have a job and friends, but I'm trapped in a maze of lies and secrets. Yes, I can be very dramatic. She said she would book a flight immediately, then we'd get with Dad and talk things over, just the three of us. I told her she didn't have to do that. I know she's busy. Plus, she and Dad hate each other. She told me she still loves Dad and always has. They just have too many differences. He couldn't accept her for who she was, but she always thought it was their destiny to be together. Her happiness in life was the hope that they'd all be family like we should be. I don't know if she was just saying this to make me feel better. It did make me feel better. It also felt weird hearing Mom talk like this. She was never the most emotional person. I thought that's why she was a good fit for Dad, because she have to be thick-skinned to be around him. She said she'd see me soon to put an end to this. And she said, I hope your dad makes the right choice. I was wondering what she was referring to, but she was gone before I could ask. I called up Dad right away to let him know, because her flight couldn't take longer than 4 or 5 hours. She'd be arriving in time for dinner. As I expected, this wasn't welcome news to him, but not for the reason I expected. Turns out he's been getting reacquainted with Betty Coffin. I said that seems a little strange coincidence. Not at all. Telling the story reminded him of her. Curtive's son is how he describes her. Jeez, Dad, what the hell? She'd sent him a message a while back telling him she'd gotten back into town. He'd just been too busy to write her back, and then he forgot. So it happened they made dinner plans that evening. He'd be going over to her place. Dad hadn't really bothered much with the relationship after he and Mom divorced. He tried. Every so often he'd meet a woman he'd really liked and seemed to like him well enough to introduce her to me. Something would always happen that scared them away. He used to joke that he was cursed. I think he probably internalized that. It was pretty much never his fault though. Sonia accused him of calling her in the middle of the night, telling her weird things. I overheard the fight. I remember one of the things was, "You'd be so much better without bones." And that he kept calling her jellyfish. What the fuck? I know Dad wouldn't do that. He would never think of something so surreal in a million years. But she believed it was him. Andrea said she started to notice things in her house would move while she was asleep. And it only started when she started seeing Dad. Her CD collection in particular. She also said one night she woke up because she heard Dad get up and go to the kitchen. She looked out the kitchen and saw him staring into the fridge. She started drifting back into sleep again when she heard more noise. The fridge door was still open, but she couldn't see him anymore. This got her mad, so she shouted for him to keep it down and close the fridge door. That's when Dad said, "What the hell is going on?" He was still lying in bed right beside her. She wouldn't have anything to do with him after that. Parker was my favorite of all Dad's girlfriends. She was a tomboy. She loved camping and she traveled a lot, so I'd hear about all different countries from her. Welcome in Boku. Like hearing him talk to her when he wasn't in the house. Well, she didn't let it get to her. They were together for a while. One night, she had an accident while driving out into a remote stretch that led to a dinky copper mining town nearby. Hey, Joe. Welcome in, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. She died a day later in the hospital from complications. It didn't seem important at the time, but now I remember Dad wondering why she'd been driving out there anyway, and her sister yelling at Dad he told Parker to meet him out there. There were other incidents. I probably don't know about all of them, but this one, back when I got Dad set up on ICQ in like 2000 or so. He started talking to this chick. He said she hit him up. He was a 2-finger typer, so I imagine it took a while to bang out messages. After he got interested enough to ask for pictures, she sent him a zip file full of them. All pictures of himself with black silhouette, MS painted into the shot. I traced the account as best as I could, and I got it to an address. The generals were out in the national park. He just wanted to drop it, and we did. Anyway, with so much bad luck and love, I guess I was happy for him. He shouldn't be alone forever. It was an awful timing. I wondered if he was even putting her in danger by dating her. But I couldn't tell him that. I told him I'd deal with Mom and he could have his date. While I waited around for Mom to call and let me know she'd arrived, I decided to search my house for holes, bedding and such. I don't think that's paranoia at this point. But there were no holes under my bed, no nests in my closet, the plumbing seemed secure, the vents blew air smoothly. Then I noticed the fridge didn't look straight. I actually thought I was being ridiculous, so I tried to distract myself. I ended up pulling it out anyway. I never believed anything would be there. But there it was. A little hole, size enough for a little boy to squeeze into. I got a flashlight and my machete. I was so sure someone's hand would grab me the moment I put my hand in. No one was there. Though, the space was only wide enough for a very slim man to stand very stiff. And I didn't see any holes in the wall where he could look into the next room, which was my bedroom, he would have just been standing there staring into the darkness behind my fridge. What would be the point? I kept wondering. Then I saw the doll. It was made of twigs. It had my face on it. Just looking at it made me feel uncomfortable. I refused to touch it. Call me superstitious, but it felt unnatural. I'd only made that discovery when I saw another doll behind it, bigger, and seeming to watch the smaller doll. His face was a picture of someone who just looked evil. I don't know what evil should really look like. I just know the face made me feel like evil was there. I've learned my lesson. I immediately called the cops and requested Detective Kirby. When he got on the line, before I could have a chance to speak, he asked me if I was okay and if I was alone. I answered yes to both his questions, as far as I know. But I wanted to know why. He said he'd been about to call me. Give me 1 second, guys. Just need some water. He said they just gotten word from the police department in my mom's town. He hesitated. I figured they found someone broke into her house or a creepy letter. But what he had to say was a lot worse than that. They found what they believed to be her body deep in a wooded area. It was so remote. It was pure chance that a camper found her. I assured him that whoever they found was not my mother. I had just spoken to her. She was on her way. The line was silent. I insisted that I be allowed to make the identification so they can drop this nonsense. Kirby said the body was past identifying. She'd been dead for over a year. Dental record confirms it was her. The only identifiable thing was her Ramones t-shirt. I hung up on him. I had no idea how to process this information. It seems someone tells you the sky is brown and salt is sweet. Do you accept it immediately? I had been speaking to my mom every 2 weeks for the last several years, and I never noticed a change in her behavior or personality until a few days ago. If she was dead, who was I speaking to this whole time? It had to be her. I know my own mother's voice, her mannerisms. She knew everything my mom should know. So I started to wonder about Detective Kirby character. Maybe he wasn't on the level. He seemed to have a strange hold over my dad, calling him Francis like that. So I called up police department in my mom's town. When I identified myself, I was immediately transferred to a detective. He told me the trace on the phone had come back. All calls from that phone were coming from my own town. Moreover, the phone isn't even registered to a local address. I felt an emptiness inside. I still feel it. It's only gotten worse. I didn't even have to ask about Detective Kirby anymore. I asked anyway and it was confirmed, but I already knew it. It couldn't have been my mother that I've been talking to. She was dead. I needed to let Dad know right away. I tried calling him. It went straight to voicemail. I hoped this meant he was already with Betty and was safe. I decided to look up Betty Coffin so I could call her and reach out that way. I found her number with an online phone lookup. It was a landline. I called it just in case. Maybe someone in her household knew her cell number. A young-sounding woman answered the phone. She sounded a little overexcited to get a call, like she'd been waiting. I introduced myself and explained that I really need to get through to Betty and it was an emergency. Is this some sort of joke? She asked. I almost lost my temper, but she explained first. My mother has been missing for a week, sir. I called Detective Kirby back. I told him we had to go to Dad's right away because he was in trouble. In a succinct a manner as possible. I told him what I knew. I was hyperventilating. I don't know how he understood half of it. I'm so glad he listened and believed me, though. I couldn't stand just waiting at home. I got in my car and rushed to my dad's. The lights were on when I arrived. That was a good sign, I thought. The front door was unlocked. When I walked in, I heard music. I recognized the song, actually. It was Bobby Darin's Dream Lover. I never heard Dad listen to anything but country. But maybe he was trying to impress a girl. Maybe she came to this place instead. I called out for him, but he didn't answer. Dad always had such an amazing hearing, even at his age. He could hear way better than me, and he was a great dad. I haven't always made him sound great, but he's my hero, you know. I knew something was wrong when he didn't answer. I searched everywhere, downstairs. The damn song kept playing on loop. It wasn't even coming from Dad's stereo. I went upstairs. The song started over just as I got to the top. When I got to Dad's bedroom, I saw where the music was coming from. A record player was on his bed. I stared at it, not really comprehending why I was so afraid to go near it. I wasn't thinking straight. It took me too long to realize it, but the song couldn't be on loop. Someone was hand looping it. Backed into a corner involuntarily. I felt control of my bladder nearly slipping. I even screamed when I heard something downstairs, but I heard them say, "Police!" And I almost cried with relief. The whole time he was watching me. All I saw was an eye at first, looking at me through the hole in my dad's box spring. I started to panic again. The officers, one was Detective Kirby, drew their guns. I pointed at the box spring as a hand reached out and set the needle back to the beginning of the song. They demanded the man to get out. He started to make awful sounds. I never heard anything like it. Inhuman screams, and one intelligible thing in all those screams. Sleep in me. Cold chills swept over me like once before. Hey, Ziggy. They finally dug him out. It was the man I'd been seeing at the building plus site, the weirdo that shouted at me. The same one gave me chills before. He was wearing a dress and a wig, with some smeared makeup and bloody nose, but it was a man. I could barely stand to look at the creature, but he wouldn't stop staring at me. I asked where my dad was, and he said in my mother's voice, "Giving birth to you was the happiest day of my life." I felt nauseous. Then, in a perfectly normal voice, in the most reasonable, yet most sinister tone I'll ever hear, he said, "He made me so lonely, but you don't know. and you'll never say another word as long as I live. They took him away, so fast it felt like a dream. Detective Kirby took me with him. I was left to go home and rest. Rest only came when I passed out, and while I slept, I found my dad. The address my mom's cell phone was registered to was the same house where my dad found the photos. Betty must have called him out there. He'd been stabbed in the neck multiple times. He's the toughest guy ever, so he was still alive when the police found him. But it was too much. He didn't make it. That's really all I can say. This is almost impossible to write. I think I must still be in shock to have written it all. There's still a little more I need to say, but it's going to have to wait a few days. So yeah, Ziggy, you made it just in time. We're about to read the final part of this seven-part series, seven-part story. So this one's just recapping, I think. I hope. It's not really recapping, but yeah. How are you? Hope you're doing well. If not, I hope just this little part will make you a little bit happier or scared. Preferably scared. Hope everyone's doing fine today, even though it's a Monday. So, woke up not even 2 minutes before getting in here. Well, I hope you enjoy your stay. So, why don't we finish this off? Part 7. Again, if you're new in chat, at the very start of every part, they go over, this is a post, so they're responding to comments to the prior post. I really want to just drop this, curl up in a ball and forget everything. But I have to put all the pieces together, what I have of them anyway. I owe it to my mom, dad, and myself. And to all of you for standing with me in this nightmare. And here it really starts. After arresting that thing in my dad's house, police combed the old house, my dad's. They found material that helped to shed some light on the events I described in the prior updates. Scraps of paper, a journal of sorts, photographs, combined with additional information with others too who grew up with my dad. From the others who grew up with my dad. What I want to do here is not give you each little piece of information. You've all had enough mystery. I wanted to give the whole story. And by whole story, I mean how I think it all fits together. It may not be 100% correct, and I wouldn't be sharing it if I didn't think it was pretty close. So, let's start at the beginning. A schizophrenic was released from the sanatorium, really an asylum. He wandered the woods until he had some kind of episode back there. He came out of little town of Grant Grieve, Shot Froy, since I have no other name for him. He went around convincing children to give him food like peanut butter and sugar sandwiches. When he met Timmy, he got a place to stay. Chad and Timmy skulked around together. He got sandwiches. Timmy was interested in other things. In particular, the family that lived a few houses down. They were the only kids around that would hang out with him. He particularly liked Dad. Dad was handsome and tall and athletic. So he got Chad to ask Flora for more than just sandwiches. He wanted to see Dad and Matt sleeping. When Timmy's parents found he'd allow a hobo to squat in their home, though they got mad, they never beat up Timmy. They just yelled at him. Then they tried to kick Chad out, so Chad and Timmy killed his parents. Police first found the body, bloodstains in the house, and then the bodies beneath it. With his parents' camera, Timmy started snapping photos of Dad and Matt and Flora while they slept. Flora noticed the light. She was just a lighter sleeper, apparently. This didn't stop Timmy. He kept taking pictures for over a year. Finally, one night, Flora caught him. She told him she'd tell her mother and that he was going to be in big trouble. The next day, Chad called him over to listen to the record. I would guess that Timmy's request, but who knows? When Timmy was coming back from buying food, he saw Flora walking away from the house. He didn't want to tell on him for taking the pictures, so he grabbed her and dragged her into the woods. He didn't kill her right away. In all the photos they found hidden in that house, there was one faded photo of a teen girl. It was Flora, I'm sure of it. In the photo, she was in some sort of cabin. She wasn't tied up, but she looked so unhappy. The whole cabin seemed tinged with unhappiness. It was an awful looking place. She was 12 when she disappeared, so she was kept somewhere after kidnapping, somewhere no one ever thought to look for her. Only Timmy and Chad knew where she was. Probably where Chad hid while police looked after him. After Timmy thought it was safe for Chad to come out, my dad was first in finding him and was involved in the man's murder. That much was confirmed by Detective Kirby. Timmy was already at his cousin's home by this time. He'd been taken as soon as his parents were found, so wherever Flora was kept, she was left alone once Chad died. While he was at his cousin's, I think Timmy had a psychotic break. Chad really was his world. He'd drawn Timmy into his delusions. He talked to what he thought was Chad in the vents in the woods, and I don't think anyone was there. No finger poked out of the vents because it was all in Timmy's head. If it wasn't all in Timmy's head, who was it? After some time with his cousins who didn't even like him, he ran away. He probably had money stashed somewhere, or maybe he just became a beggar. My dad, on the other hand, grew up and moved on. He met a beautiful gymnast and married her. That's where I come in. You were a reasonably happy family, from what I understand, until something happened that made Mom and Dad resent each other. They divorced. Dad fought like hell for custody, and Mom went back west where he'd originally come from. Not long after Mom was out of the picture, I started seeing flashing lights. When I told Dad and Uncle Matt, it terrified them. The possibility that I could end up disappearing like Flora is just about the only thing that could terrify my dad. What I never knew is that I told them about the lights. They went out to the park together while I stayed with Uncle Matt's wife. They spent all day looking for the place they buried Chad, but they found it. They dug him up and made sure he was really dead. That's why Dad was so insistent that the lights were just in my head of passing cars, because the guy believed behind Flora's abduction was buried and dead. They had believed it was him behind it, because if they didn't, they'd murder an innocent man. Since this man probably murdered Timmy's parents, he wasn't that innocent, but who knows. That's why Dad was so. Years later, when Dad found the pictures of me in that house, he knew he'd been wrong. Whoever it was, he figured, was the same person taking Flora's pictures. They murdered the wrong person and now he's in danger. He went out looking for anyone suspicious, roughed up a few guys, but nothing came of it. What I think happened is that Timmy was still obsessed with Dad. He did something to sabotage Mom and Dad's relationship. Then when Mom was out of the picture, he inserted himself into the family in the only way he knew how, by sneaking pictures of me while I slept. I believe Timmy must have had our phones and homes bugged. He adapted to being a shadow in our lives. Maybe he imagined he was something more. After a while, this wasn't enough to satisfy him. He murdered my mother and pretended to be her for a year. I think this gave him what he really wanted, to be Dad's wife and my mother. His obsession with my dad wasn't just admiration. He was in love with him. He resented my mom, hated her even, for taking what he believed was his. He wasn't taking my foot picture because he wanted to scare me or abduct me. He thought he was being motherly. He drew pictures of himself nursing me and Dad smiling behind. And whenever Dad found a new girl he was interested in, Timmy had to take her out of the picture, like a jealous wife. He believed in his delusions sometimes. When I let him, or Mom, know what I was investigating these events, I think it made him feel more important in our lives. And I think it also threatened him. Becoming more aware of him was ruining his illusion that he wasn't really my mom, that he started acting out. When he talked to me as my mother, telling me Dad had to make a choice, I think he expected Dad to see him as Mom and fall in love. Betty Coffin's body was found. He killed her just to seduce my dad into meeting. The choice was between Betty or Mom. Because Dad chose Betty, he killed him. He ran back to Dad's house into the box spring where he'd been living for weeks. The music, the makeup, and dress was all supposed to be for Dad's reunion with Mom, if he'd chosen her. I wish I hadn't encouraged Dad to go on that date. If I hadn't, he might still be alive. The whole thing is so stupid. Insanity, obsession, and loneliness, all unprovoked by us. I hate him, and I want him to rot. And then I don't even know why. He really was just crazy. I wrote all of this feeling real sure of myself last night. It was therapeutic, at least. I needed to put all this in some sort of order. This morning, I Got News just shakes it all up. Y'all remember the Etch-a-Sketch, right? Like, while everything is sad, I said is, in a way, still true. There's one very important part that's wrong. Part of what makes this whole... a part that makes a whole lot of it make no sense at all. Detective Kirby told me they weren't able to identify the man they caught at Dad's home. However, they could positively state who he wasn't. This man was not Timmy Jean. Timmy is arrested at a group home over 300 miles away, where he's been in the past 4 years. He's practically shut in, Kirby says. He never goes anywhere, ever. The man they arrested has no identification. His prints aren't in the system. No dental records. Nothing. And so far, stuck to his promise, he hasn't spoken since that night. Other prisoners avoid him like they're afraid. They say they don't know why. They won't say why. Just that there's something wrong. And they're right. The last thing I want to leave you all with is a strange story I heard from an old friend of Dad's. Dad's friend is a ranger at the national park where Dad's town used to be. He said over the years he's heard odd stories about things deep in the woods. But one from not too long ago stands out. He felt an urge to tell me. I have no idea why. I can't say it connects to anything else. It has nothing to do with my family or Timmy. It just feels like it fits somehow. A couple from a town was in the area to do some hiking. The park connects to the Appalachian Trail, so lots of experienced hikers come through. They decided to do a little off-trail hiking. As I mentioned before, there are miles of untouched woods back there, so they have plenty of room to do some exploring. After hours in the woods, they realized their compass wasn't working at all. Their phones had no signal, of course. They were lost. That deep in the woods were pretty dense, and the sun was starting to set. They were experienced enough to have adequate water, rations, and camping gear, so they didn't panic. But they kept walking, hoping to make it to a road or a ranger's camp. When it got too dark to see, they started to set up camp. That's when the girl tells boyfriend she can see lights. He looks to see it too. It looks like artificial light. They weren't sure if they weren't sure if they were still deep in woods or not. It felt too eerie. They walked carefully toward it, using an emergency flashlight. They couldn't hear any traffic as they got near and saw no other lights. The lights seemed to be coming from a real house. A little aged, but no cabin or shack. There was a clearing around the house, large enough for two people to walk side by side. The guy insisted they examine the perimeter first. His girlfriend thought he was being ridiculous, but he told her he had a bad feeling about this place. She thought the woods at night was making him jumpy. Still, she went along. Shingled roof, wood-sided walls, curtained windows, and even the front porch. What they couldn't find was a road, or even a path or trail. Nothing but woods. The woods surrounded the whole circumference as densely as any part of the woods. That didn't sit right. But they needed help. They knocked on the only door. An older man answered the door pretty quickly. He looked well-groomed, dressed in a nice shirt and pullover sweaters. "Evening, strangers," he said, like it was no big deal. The boyfriend apologized for bothering him and explained how they'd been wandering in the woods all day, and his house was the first they found. The man was understanding. He invited them inside and seated them in his living room. It was nicely decorated and toasty inside. They didn't even notice her at first. But there was a woman seated in the corner of the room. She didn't say anything. She nodded politely to them when they noticed. The guy and the girl exchanged glances. They felt horribly uncomfortable. The man returned to the living room with a tray of tea. He sat in front of them, then sat across from them. They poured themselves each a cup. The man watched them carefully. They didn't like the way he scrutinized them. The fire crackled and popped sinisterly. It seemed to them behind him. The tension of the silence kept mounting, so the guy decided to say something. He noted that he hadn't seen any roads or path around the house. "Nope," the man agreed. So he asked how the man comes and goes to this. So he stays put. "How about supplies?" The man leans back in the chair and looks at the guy suspiciously. "You're awfully curious. he says. They heard a strange, wet thudding noise somewhere else inside the house right then. The man didn't react, so they pretended to ignore it. But they were both starting to get nervous being in the place. The guy asked how far the nearest road. The guy asked how far from the nearest road they were. He was calculating in his head, as if enough battery, if they have enough battery to see them to it in the dark. The man answered that they were very far from any other road, on all sides. The girl said it was weird to her that this place was so hidden, because unless someone knew it was there or stumbled on it by pure accident, no one would ever find it. There couldn't be an address, after all, if there was no road. The man asked which they were, and then said, "How do I know you didn't come here to kill me?" But they didn't know what to say. They figured it was a joke and laughed uncomfortably. But he just smirked at them. He excused himself and then vanished around the corner into the dark hallway. While they were alone, they looked around the room. There was a painting hanging over the fireplace that kept catching the guy's attention. He didn't know why. He hated art. It was a scene of a couple walking through a clearing. There were thick shrubs around. Now that he looked at the painting more closely, he saw something that he swore he wasn't there before. Staring out from the shrubs was a man's face, watching the couple with a look of pure hate. He was really creeped out, but he didn't want his girlfriend to see. They drank more tea because it was warm. They'd been taking a few gulps when they noticed the girl in the corner again. They only noticed her this time because she was shaking her head, almost imperceptibly, but she kept doing it, shaking her head and looking around, looking at the teacups. She became perfectly still when the man returned. The guy tried to explain to the man they must be going. He didn't feel well, and there had been way too many red flags to keep ignoring. But the words came out of his mouth were slurred and ineffectual, and he passed out. When he woke, he had an awful headache. He shook his girlfriend awake as well. They realized they'd been sleeping for some time. The guy suspected they'd been drugged and couldn't be certain. The man was nowhere to be seen. Neither was the woman, and their gear was missing. They wanted to leave right away, but needed their supplies, but had no idea how far any road were, so they went searching in the rooms of the house. There were 3 doors down the hall, all led to bedrooms. The first 2 were empty, so was the last, but it had their gear on the middle of a child's bed. They grabbed their stuff and prepared to leave, but the guy saw a curtain covering an opening at the very end of the hall, and he had to know. He pulled it open. It was just a closet. The man and the woman must have left the house, he thought. Then he noticed his girlfriend's face. She was terrified of something. So much she was backing away and tugging at him. He looked back in the closet. It was the man, crouched down naked in the bottom of the closet looking at them with a smile that crossed most of his face. But his eyes fixed them the most unmistakable, intense rage. He started crawling out of the closet toward them on all fours and making sounds they'd never hear any living thing make before. They ran out of the house straight into the woods. They moved fast as possible, cutting themselves and tripping several times. Something in their guts kept telling them that the man was right behind them, like the man in the bushes in that horrible painting, and he was going to kill them. They finally came out of the woods on a dirt road, and from there slowly followed it to a real road and found their way back to town. They told the park rangers about it and were advised to keep the story to themselves. Later, they looked the area up on Google Maps. It took them a while, but they spotted the clearing in the woods. It was even deeper in the woods than they thought. As they zoomed in, the guy saw something weird in front of the house. He cleaned up the image as best as he could. Still a bit blurry, but the couple knew what it was. The man was standing in front of the house and looking straight up, like he knew they were watching. They sent the image to the rangers as proof. I know there are still so many questions. What happened to Flora? Was Timmy dealing with someone else? How did he know so much about my mom? Who was the guy who got arrested? And why was the Ramones t-shirt on my mom's body? I just don't know. So for now, that'll just have to be the end. Are you satisfied, Careless? Because I'm not. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. I hope to be making this a weekly thing. I'll have to come up with a name for it though. Big horror hours. Despite the relatively loose ending, I honestly really like it. Still, there's a lot of open endings aren't bad per se, but God, I just wish I could know more. You know. Why don't we find someone to raid? Kel is still going. No, he's not. Never mind. I don't have any ASM artists you guys can fun. Yeah, hi, Nug. You're very, very welcome. Hope you enjoyed. I don't know. I don't have anyone to raid. So why don't we just call it a night, shall we? I hope you all enjoyed your stay and you weren't too scared. And if you were, my job's done. So, bye everyone, and have a great evening. Stay scared.